Hello and welcome back to another strangely awesome video. Now that Andor Season 2 is just weeks away, we thought now would be a great time to take a look at the 9 seasons of live-action Star Wars TV we've gotten since Disney Plus launched all the way back in 2019. At number 9, we have The Mandalorian Season 3. If you were to tell me even 2 years ago that Season 3 of The Mandalorian would end up being my least favorite season of Star Wars, I never would have believed you. The first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian were such a special time for the Star Wars community, so everyone was hyped for a third season. And at first, Season 3 was off to a really solid start, with some really fun moments and a return to the adventure of the week vibe of the first couple seasons. In spite of that, the latter half of the season really fell off hard, and I've only grown to become more frustrated with those episodes in hindsight. If I had to describe The Mandalorian Season 3 in one word, that word would be disappointing. Not only did it effectively walk back most of the compelling developments from Din Djarin and Grogu in Season 2, but the season doesn't really work on its own either. The Mandalorian was at its best as a self-contained Adventure of the Week type of story. With Season 3, the show felt like it was trying way too hard to develop and fit within this connected Star Wars universe of shows and movies. While there was some great action and some fun Easter eggs that started to tie the original and sequel trilogies together, The Mandalorian Season 3 ultimately fell flat. It feels like Disney started treating The Mandalorian as a brand rather than a story here, which is such an unfortunate direction for the show to take, considering it was once considered the Star Wars prestige TV show. Number 8, Ahsoka Season 1. Ahsoka was another show I was so hyped for that just fell flat. Growing up with the Clone Wars, I was a massive fan of the character, and her live-action appearances in The Mandalorian Season 2 and the Book of Boba Fett really sold me on Rosario Dawson's turn as the character. But we'll start with the positives here. The characters in Ahsoka are excellent. Ahsoka herself is an absolute joy to watch, as are the new Darkside mercenaries Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati. The returning characters from Rebels were really solid too, and this might be a fairly hot take, but I actually really like Sabine in this show. I think the selfish choices she makes are very human and believable, and could have had some really fascinating implications for the future of Star Wars storytelling as well as her own character. Unfortunately, they ultimately don't. So many of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows don't stick the landing, and I think Ahsoka's just hurts the most. There was some excellent mystery and tension built up in the journey to a brand new Star Wars galaxy, but getting there was so underwhelming. All we see of this exciting new galaxy is one planet, which is incredibly boring visually. There was so much hype to see a brand new side of the Star Wars universe, just for it to be gray skies, pale rocks, and dull plains. Thrawn was also fairly underutilized here, which might have been even more disappointing actually, considering how long his live-action debut had been teased in other Star Wars media. With that being said, the thing that keeps Ahsoka from the bottom spot is that it has one undeniable standout episode. Part 5, Shadow Warrior. This is a dream come true episode of Star Wars TV. Seeing Ahsoka relive the Clone Wars in live action and having her reunite with Anakin in the World Between Worlds is just incredible to watch. Obviously, this was all hitting the prequel nostalgia hard. Fan service aside, the episode had some really fascinating character growth and development for Ahsoka, while also adding layers to Anakin and Vader. I will admit I've never watched much of Rebels, and while I am familiar with its characters, I do think that could be a big part of why Ahsoka didn't hit for me. So if you're a Rebels fan, let us know your thoughts on Ahsoka Season 1 in our comments. Number 7, The Acolyte. On paper, The Acolyte has the most interesting concept of any Star Wars show to date. It's a murder mystery where a Jedi investigate crimes using the dark side, set a century before the Phantom Menace, and laying the foundation for the Sith to rise to power and revealing themselves for the first time in the High Republic. This is a fascinating era of Star Wars, backed up by the creatives behind the incredible Netflix series Russian Doll and a really solid cast. I actually got the opportunity to see a look at the first episode of this show in theaters as an extra bonus after watching the re-release of The Phantom Menace, so my hype couldn't have been higher after seeing Carrie-Anne Moss as a Jedi on the big screen. When The Acolyte finally premiered, I actually felt pretty satisfied at first. The concept of 2 twins on opposite sides of the Force was really cool, and the new Jedi Knights and Masters introduced like Jeki, Sol, and Yord had me sold immediately. The characters were fun, the mystery was building, but all its momentum came crashing. The Acolyte's biggest problem is that it's so obviously a movie plot bent to fit the TV format. Watching The Acolyte week to week was downright frustrating. Episodes would seemingly end out of nowhere, and the length of each episode was so varied and random that sometimes I'd start an episode frustrated just seeing its runtime on Disney+. Some of these episodes were full episodes of flashbacks, so there were times where viewers left hanging on cliffhangers for 2 weeks, yet somehow this still felt rushed. That being said, The Acolyte still had some incredible moments and characters that I will remember forever. There were some incredible lightsaber fights with real stakes, as characters I've become fans of were absolutely decimated by Khmer. And oh my god, what a finale. Again, incredible lightsaber fights, some great character moments with Master Soul, Osha, and May, and teases for a really fascinating second season. The Acolyte's cancellation might end up being looked at as one of the franchise's biggest tragedies. In Season 1's finale, we got our first look at Darth Plagueis in canon, and a tease of Yoda returning to the screen, seemingly as a practical puppet like in the original trilogy, which could have been awesome. But even for all its great moments, the thing I remember the most about The Acolyte is how disjointed and frustrating its first and final season was to watch as it aired. It's such a shame because there's clearly potential there, but it just didn't execute, and it never will because some of the angriest parts of the Star Wars fandom convinced Disney that the show was just not worth following up on. Number 6 is The Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett is one of those Star Wars spin-offs that it seemed obvious was going to be at the top of Disney's list once they bought the IP. And it makes sense, right? Fans have always loved Boba Fett, and he's long been one of the franchise's most popular characters. I never really got it, to be honest, because he never got a chance to do much on the big screen, but as a result, giving him his own series was a no-brainer, especially with how successful The Mandalorian ended up being. Still, it was actually The Mandalorian's success which overshadowed the Boba Fett show quite a bit. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. I want to start by talking about Fett himself and the arc he takes here. Potentially a very hot take, but I actually really like it. Boba Fett becomes an actual character here with a heart, some agency, and he has meaningful relationship with people around Tatooine that inspire him to be better. Seeing him be taken in by the Tuskens was such a fascinating arc, and developed that iconic faction from cannon fodder to an actual culture. Some of those moments were genuinely touching, especially when you consider that a lot of the fighting style and celebratory dances around the fire were inspired by the Haka and Morrison's Maori culture. Again, I know this might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but I do really like how Boba Fett ends up softening up a bit here. I always thought all the love from the original trilogy was a bit overrated, but here, that would be earned. As he takes over the Hutt's territory in Tatooine, he becomes a fascinating hero with a bit of a dark side still, and he acts as a true leader rather than a ruler. I also really love where he ends in the series, as we get to see him be a badass, ruthless warrior against some messed up folks who truly deserve it, including the infamous Cad Bane. So for me, most of the issues I have with the series really have nothing to do with Boba Fett himself. Rather, it's how much of his screen time is sacrificed to build out this new, interconnected Dave Filoni Star Wars universe. Obviously, there's an entire Mandalorian-focused episode, which walks back to the most interesting developments of that show's finale in Season 2. The Book of Boba Fett just gets incredibly bloated for a few episodes with how many big-time characters from other things are shoehorned in, and this makes the rest of the series rush to make up for the missed time. There's a tweet from Star Wars Holocron that pointed out that Chapter 6 of the Book of Boba Fett featured Luke Skywalker, Din Djarin, Grogu, Ahsoka, Cad Bane, R2-D2, Boba Fett, Fennec, Cobb Vanth, and Chrysanthemum all in one episode. It's a bit much, don't you think? However, another place where I actually defend Boba Fett is that the hate for the mods went way overboard. They were actually kind of fun, and fit in a lot with the 60s and 70s vibe that inspired the aesthetics of A New Hope really well. Also, Cobb Vanth instantly became one of my favorite characters in the Star Wars universe. I'm so glad we got so much of him here, and I really hope we see more of him soon. Alright, number 5 is Skeleton Crew Season 1. I don't really have a ton to say about Skeleton Crew because the show is fairly straightforward, but honestly, that's a breath of fresh air. Skeleton Crew brought back a lot of the fun and childish whimsy to Star Wars, which made me feel super nostalgic for the feelings I had when I originally watched it as a young kid. Watching a lovable cast of younger kids discover some of the larger Star Wars galaxy after leaving their homeworld is just such a joy. The story really feels like some of the best kids movies from the 80s, with really clear inspiration from the Goonies and E.T. But props to the entire cast. The main ensemble of kids is great, with Neil being a standout as one of the most fun characters in all of Disney Star Wars. Jude Law killed it as Jod too, with a really interesting but kind of obvious backstory of a Force-sensitive turned pirate as he tried to survive in a post-Order 66 world. With all that said, Skeleton Crew was simple but a blast, even though the ending fell a little short, and there's a few lessons we learned from it. First off, I think it's totally okay to make different Star Wars shows be for different audiences, and it's great to have smaller scale stories within the universe. As long as great characters are at the core of the story, people are going to get attached. Now, before we get into our next pick, we're going to take a moment to remind you that Strangely Awesome is an independently owned small business all about entertainment and games. If you want to support us, the good news is you already are watching our videos. However, if you really like what we do, please like and subscribe to let us and YouTube know you want to see more, and consider sending us YouTube Super Chats or giving us a membership on Patreon at the link below. Thanks for your time, and let's get back to the video. Number 4, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Before Disney owned Star Wars, the era between the prequels and the original trilogy was mostly unexplored territory. In the decade since the prequels kicked off, we've got loads of content bridging the gap between episodes 3 and 4. At the center of it all, fans were so hyped to see Ewan McGregor step back into the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and his Disney Plus miniseries mostly delivered. This 6-episode event did an excellent job reuniting viewers with the Kenobi they remember from the prequels, and building a bridge from that version of the character to the old Ben we know and love from the original Star Wars movie. Obviously, Ewan killed it as Kenobi, but the visuals of the series were really solid too. This early era of the Empire brought some of the best concepts from canon Star Wars TV and video games into live action in a huge way. Getting to see the Inquisitors and their fortress in live action was such a blast, and gave Obi-Wan some great villains to face off against too. Obviously, much has been said about the Inquisitor Reva over the years, but I actually enjoyed Moses Ingram's performance and thought the character brought a lot to the show. Her anger and the conflict with mirrored Anakin's a lot, and gave Obi-Wan Kenobi a satisfying shot at redemption to save a fallen Jedi from the dark side of the Force. So Inquisitors aside, we all know the main big bad of the series is none other than Vader himself, and what a treat that return was. The face-off between Kenobi and Vader has been sold as the rematch of the century by Kathleen Kennedy, and fans got to see them face off twice with some great lightsaber battles with incredible emotional stakes behind them. I get why some fans think Obi-Wan and Vader's final duel before the Death Star should have stayed the Battle of the Heroes on Mustafar, I really do. However, this new dynamic between Kenobi and Vader has some top-notch performances from McGregor and Hayden Christensen. It explores the dynamic with more depth than the prequels got to, and brings so much to both characters. To me, this actually makes their face-off in A New Hope more satisfying to watch. Speaking of A New Hope, this series has yet another major connection to that movie with a major role for young Leia. While the grizzled old man protecting a child who teaches him about himself trope was already well-explored territory at this point, I did love seeing this duo on screen together. Vivian Lyra Blair was excellent as a childhood Princess Leia, with much of the character's feist and disinterest with royalty already apparent. With all that said, Kenobi brought us some really incredible moments with iconic Star Wars characters, and introduced some compelling new ones. All this was done across a tight 6-episode miniseries, which didn't really waste any time, and it felt like a proper love letter and send-off to the Star Wars prequel era. Number 3, The Mandalorian Season 2. It's really hard to look at Mandalorian Season 2 in a vacuum because it's really what kicked off this interconnected New Republic era of TV shows and upcoming movies. Also, some of the best and most emotional story developments of Season 2 were undone by Season 3 in an effort to reset the show. That being said, Season 2 was a great journey in and of itself. While it may have started slower than most would have liked, the back half does an incredible job at starting to introduce some of the wider Star Wars galaxy. Mando Season 2 reintroduced Star Wars fans to some truly beloved characters like Ahsoka Tano, Boba Fett, and even a brief appearance from Luke Skywalker. However, these characters don't detract too much from the overall outcome of the show. The evolving relationship between Din and Grogu remained intact for most of The Mandalorian Season 2, and it felt like the true heart of the show, even as Mando and Grogu become involved in a conflict with much greater scale than they've ever had before. At number 2, we have The Mandalorian Season 1. Even with all the incredible characters in Mando's Season 2, I still think Season 1 is still the best. The first season of Mandalorian was such a breath of fresh air, and such a magic time to be a Star Wars fan. After how divisive the sequels had been, the world finally had something to be positive about in the Star Wars universe with The Mandalorian Season 1, and it looked incredible and employed some really inventive new filmmaking tech while still feeling like the original trilogy of Star Wars. The Mandalorian Season 1 went back to the western side of the franchise's early inspirations, showing off a time of lawlessness after the Empire had fallen in Return of the Jedi. Fans were treated to an incredible serial-style show with an exciting adventure each week, which introduced us to lovable side characters and developed an incredible father-son relationship between the Mandalorian and who we all then called Baby Yoda. Maybe some of it is nostalgia talking, but the first season of Mandalorian was something truly special. This felt like a whole new direction for the franchise, while still remaining familiar to fans of the original trilogy. This showed fans the galaxy shaped by the events of those iconic films from the perspective of some amazing new characters who are now iconic in their own right. Andor Season 1. Andor isn't just peak Star Wars, but it's honestly some of the best genre TV of the last decade. Cassian Andor was probably the best and most interesting character out of Rogue One, which showed a war-torn, gritty version of the Star Wars galaxy. Andor does the same, but even further develops what fans loved about Rogue One to make something truly special. Andor is structured around 4 incredible 3-episode arcs, and each showcased a different side of the fight against the Empire at a specific moment in Cassian's journey to become a rebellion war hero. This arc structure ensures stories feel complete and cohesive, yet distinct from each other, with some excellent settings and themes that carry over, but give each a unique reason to love it. My personal favorite is The Eye. This sees Andor and a ragtag team do a heist at an Imperial facility while the planet's population is distracted by an incredible, once-in-a-generation star event. It's absolutely beautiful and perhaps the most jaw-dropping moment visually in all of Star Wars. Of course, other arcs like the Prison Break especially have their own moments and characters which may make them your favorite, so let us know in the comments which is yours. But still, even without moments like The Eye, Andor might also be the best looking of any of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows. The production value here is insane, and the sets, cinematography, and lighting create some really bleak landscapes of the galaxy under the Empire's rule. Yet, there's plenty of beauty to be found here too, and Andor is ultimately an inspiring, though often tragic, journey as Cassian finds his way and learns how he and those around him can fight back against the Empire. So those are our picks ranking every season of live-action Star Wars TV we currently have on Disney+. What are your rankings? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more videos on TV, movies, wrestling, and video games, and head to our website, strangelyAwesomeGames.com, for more on those topics in Star Wars.